So the two types of pencils that we'll use for this assignment are either a sketching pencil, which is a 6B pencil. That just refers to the softness or hardness of the lead and also how dark of a value we can get with that pencil. The other one is an ebony pencil, and they're pretty similar. The ebony might be just a little bit softer, but they're both going to give us a nice dark value. This is my original photograph, all gridded and contour lined, and then this is my photograph printed in grayscale. And the quality of mine's probably a little bit sharper than the camera quality of the Chromebooks that you guys used. But nonetheless, I think you can see what's happened here is all those pretty colors just got translated for us in grayscale. Now, the tendency people want to do with when working on shading for some reason is to go to the darkest value they possibly can first. It feels like a big step and you feel like you've really accomplished something, but here's the problem. The shading pencils we're using are very dark and also very soft, which means the longer they sit on your page, the more likely they are to be moved around your page and turn your drawing into a big muddy mess, especially if you're someone who tends to lean on your hand, on this part of your hand, when you're drawing, right? And that's pretty common. That's something we tend to do when we're writing for the purpose of controlling our hand. And so we get into that habit. And then your hand, anybody get done drawing and find their hands all dark? That's because you tend to drag your hand through your drawing. And with ebony pencil, that can really be a challenge. So that's something that you want to pay close attention to. But for that reason, I recommend you start in the middle with your medium values and don't go straight for the darkest darks. Okay? So what would that be? Well, both of my second and my third horse back are a pretty good example of that kind of medium value. And when we apply the value, just like when we are filling color in on something, we want to apply it evenly. So a circular overlapping motion is a good idea, just like this. But the nice thing about the ebony and the sketching pencil, if you guys can see, there's a little bit of white still visible on the page. That's okay, because the cool thing about an ebony pencil is because that lead is so soft, we can literally move it around and help to fill in those little cracks and grooves in the paper, okay? So I'm looking on my paper for any places where I see that medium tone, that middle ground, all right? And it's okay if I spill out of those spots here and there. I can define my bright areas by shading around them. So if you notice that the mane of the horse is bright, I make that area stand out by shading behind it. Now, some of you are going to get to a place where you're like, oh, this is a big gray muddy mess. What do I do? Don't worry. Trust the process. Because one really cool thing I think about shading pencils is they're so forgiving. So not along the way, but towards the end, when we're ready to bring back those bright brights, an eraser can actually act as a drawing tool. So we'll be able to bring back those lightest values, okay? Now eventually, of course, we'll get to our darkest darks, but for right now, what I really want you guys focusing on is the middle grays. Now, what do you do if one kind of middle gray is right up against another middle gray? Like this back of the horse isn't all that different than the back of this horse. What are some ways that I can make sure that I don't lose track of what's what? Well, one thing is texture. Notice that the texture of the mane is different than the texture of just the back of the horse. So in this case, I'm intentionally letting my pencil stroke show because I want it to look like horsehair. I want it to look like the mane of the horse. I want to look at the direction of the horse's hair, let it wrap around a little bit. And also, it's not a bad idea to just check yourself, okay? which edge, as they come up against each other, is darker. The closer horse is darker. So even if they're similar in value, I want to make sure that I differentiate one from the other by determining which one is the darkest of the two edges. So see how just that little effort there, now I've made a distinction between the closer horse and the further away horse. Okay? So this is not a fast process. This is something that's going to take some time. You're not going to want to rush this. We're not going to knock it out in a day. It's going to take a better part of this week, maybe even into next week. It is better to go slow and steady than to rush and then have to revisit and revise in order to bring it back to what we want it to look like. Okay?